Untangled. Well, let me ask you this. What is the most disappointing Christmas gift you've ever received? Don't say it out loud if the person next to you is the one who gave it. Think for a second, the movie The Christmas Story, when little Ralphie, remember that, gets the Christmas bunny outfit from his great aunt and just hates that thing. He's so mad, and his mother makes him put it on along with the matching bunny slippers. I remember I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and my grandma comes over, and she has a whole bag of gifts, and I think she's just going to pass them around. She hands the whole bag to me, and there's like 5 or 6 individual wrap gifts. I thought, I hit the jackpot this year. So I opened the first one, and it was a bar of soap. And not the good soap. Let me just clarify. It was the dollar store soap. So I opened the second one, and Grandma had wrapped some shampoo. And then the next one was a toothbrush. You guys get the idea. And I remember my heart, I was trying to smile and thank Grandma and hide the disappointment on my face. I didn't realize at the time, because my grandfather was disabled, my grandmother was living in poverty, but my little kid heart was like, what in the world is happening? I just want to publicly thank you, Grandma. My grandma is going to be 100 years old in about 6 weeks, and Grandma, I loved all of those hygiene products. I really appreciated your heart behind all of it. I love you, Grandma. She's not watching this. She doesn't have an iPad. She doesn't have any of it. But I will call her this afternoon and tell her. I call her every Sunday. We all have been disappointed when we didn't get that gift we wanted, right? Especially when you gave hints, including links that included the size and the color that you wanted, and the person just didn't quite get it, right? Every Christmas, we find ourselves just a little bit tangled with some level of disappointment in our lives. It doesn't matter how old we are. What does disappointment look like for you this Christmas? Maybe there's an empty seat around the table this year. Maybe you lost a family member or a loved one this year. Maybe there's family members or loved ones that just for whatever reason can't be at your table because they live too far away. Maybe the finances are just so tight you can't get the AirPod Maxes that your kid wants, right? Bring them on Wednesday. You never know. Christmas miracles. Christmas miracles. I got to tell this story. Yesterday, there was a lady that came to Winter Wonderland. I'm like, what did we call that thing? Winter Wonderland. And she's over talking to my daughter saying, my son really wants a scooter. Have you heard this story? My son really wants a scooter. And she says, they're giving away an electric scooter in just a few minutes. Hurry, fill out the QR code. And Brandon picked this woman to win the scooter yesterday. She couldn't believe it that she walked in here wanting a scooter for her kid and walked away with one. But maybe you're like me. There's just kind of an underlying sense of disappointment for some things in the world. Maybe you're like me and you turn on the news and you see the war-torn world that we live in, and that the pain that people are living with so little, and yet I have so much. And God, sometimes you feel a little helpless. You ever watch the news and you think, oh God, the world's in a hurting place. How do I even begin? And we've done some things, and we've given the convoy of hope, and we pray for our hurting world. But sometimes there's just a long list of reasons that you and I could be disappointed every Christmas, right? Because there's something about Christmas that seems to take our disappointments and just tangle them even a little bit more. What is disappointment? You ever think, what is disappointment? We talk about it. Here's the dictionary description of disappointment. Sadness or displeasure caused by the non-fulfillment of one's hopes or expectations. In this season of Advent, which we're starting the 3rd week today, we are focused on the hope and the expectancy of the Messiah, right? Coming. Christmas reminds us that our hopes can be fulfilled in Jesus. But disappointment happens when there's that non-fulfillment. Amazon, we ordered something on Amazon several weeks ago. In fact, it was the scooter. I didn't even plan this. It was the scooter, and I got a phone call, and it was this lady. You ever worried, you think anybody who calls me, I think I'm getting scammed, right? Anybody. Brandon calls me. Are you sure? Is this really Brandon Jones? Are you sure you really need something for youth group? But I get a phone number, and they're saying, hey, ma'am, we're just calling to let you know you ordered something on Amazon, and unfortunately, there's been a warehouse fire, and we just wanted to call and apologize. It's going to be refunded to your account. And sometimes things we order don't get fulfilled because of different reasons in our lives. I tried to hold that disappointment from my grandma, but I'm sure she could probably see it on my face. When we zoom in on the Christmas story, there's a lot of disappointment in the Christmas story. None of us can avoid disappointment in life, can we? But we can learn how to respond to it when it comes. I want to talk about what the Christmas story can reveal about dealing and untangling our disappointments so that we can unlock the joy of Christmas. I don't know about you, but I need a little bit more joy this Christmas. So I want to welcome to the table this morning Pastor Brandon and Pastor Arianna. Come on up. So tell me, what kind of disappointments do you guys deal with around the holidays? I know you're single, you're married, single, one to mingle. Is that true?
Sure.
Put him on the spot, Beth.
You know anybody like me?
Sorry, I'm feeling just extra joyful this morning.
I guess I should be disappointed about that. No. So I'm from Seattle.
Yes.
So any Seattle
Born and
raised people here. I love it here, but it never snows on Christmas.
Every year.
Every year it
you
rains.
Just get your hopes up.
There's this scene in the second Home Alone movie where they pull into like a motel parking lot and it's just raining. Yeah. And that's how I feel on Christmas Eve, just looking out my window and it's just pouring rain. And a couple years ago it snowed on December 26th, which
the day after.
Which is just wrong.
Just missed
it's
it.
like, I don't want snow now. I want it to be summer. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm not from Seattle, so I guess my disappointment around Christmas is I moved here, and my family's quite far away.
Yeah.
Some of them live in the Midwest, some of them live in Las Vegas, so I don't get to see my family a lot around Christmas.
Yeah. Same
so
with us.
that can be hard.
Same with us. All of our family are in the Midwest, so when I see these families, I'm like, hey, what are you doing? Oh, grandma's coming, aunties, uncles, we're all getting together, we're making tamales.
Yes,
we're
that's
having
what
a
we
good
do.
time. That's what you guys do. I think, it's kind of sad. It gets a little lonely because our families aren't always able to travel and they live far away. But Mary and Joseph had some major disappointments along the way that first Christmas. And so, Arianna, unpack with us, what can we learn about untangling the disappointment through the Christmas story?
Yeah, well, disappointment in life is kind of unavoidable.
Right.
It's like taxes and death. It comes for us all. No one's going to escape it, no matter what socioeconomic class, ethnicity. We're all going to experience disappointment in our lives at different levels. So our lives and the Christmas story is actually riddled with different disappointments that we experience. So talking about Mary and Joseph, they experienced quite a lot of disappointment for this first baby.
Right.
First of all, their wedding plans were dashed when they figured out Mary is pregnant before they're married. It was quite a scandal as a teen mom. Secondly, another disappointment they experienced was when it came time to have the baby, they were traveling. There wasn't really a great place to have the baby. The hospital bed was not open, Here's a little known fact, a little myth buster for you guys. Jesus wasn't actually born in a barn. A lot of scholars have looked really closely at Scripture, and just based on the culture and just the words of Scripture, they found that in fact, they were born in kind of a common room that is at the bottom of the house where animals are brought in at night to kind of escape predators. Yeah. So it's kind of more like the guest rooms and the top of the house were all filled. So they had to stay in the kind of downstairs, meager, common area. But it was
like
still
if you
with
came
animals.
to my house and I'd put you in the basement or the attic.
And your basement had cows, Yeah. Yeah, it was probably like that. Not the best, most sanitary place to birth your first baby, right? That must have been pretty disappointing.
Yeah.
And thirdly, this is crazy. I don't think anybody has this in their story, but there was an evil king after Jesus and his family trying to kill Jesus. He went so far, in fact, that in Jesus' hometown, he killed all boys under the age of 2 just to try to get rid of Jesus because they were saying Jesus was going to be the king. King obviously did not like that, right? So he killed just absolutely crazy infanticide, killed all of these children. And Jesus and his family only escaped because God spoke to them in a dream. So it was not, the childhood they expected, growing up in a different country that wasn't their own. There was a lot of disappointments that kind of riddled the Christmas story.
It doesn't sound like a Hallmark movie.
Right, it's not the classic Hallmark movie. It is quite an odd story that we find so joyful every year.
Right.
And joyful for good reason, but there were some other things happening, right?
Yeah.
So disappointment leads to detours. We see that Mary and Joseph don't have the normal first baby, marriage experience that they expect.
Yeah.
Instead, God takes them on some detours, right?
Yeah,
so
that's
detours, they take us to the same destination, but they kind of make us go a different route that we're not expecting, right? Yeah, so in Matthew 2:12 it says, when it was time to leave, they returned to their own country by another route, for God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. So when faced with terrible disappointment, God led them by another route to keep them safe, to give them blessing. So what are some unexpected disappointments or detours that God has given you?
Yeah, so I'm pretty young still. I don't know if you can tell by the way I look. I'm young, so I'm 24. I have to remind myself that I'm not old, right?
Young.
So this is my first job in ministry, and when I graduated college, I'll be honest with you all, I did not expect that my first job working at a church would be at a church plant or a church that's in the mall. I grew up not too far from here. Definitely didn't think I'd be at this mall either, right? So I was talking to some different churches from around the West Coast, up and down from California to Oregon to Washington, and I got really far along the process in talking to one church. It was a bigger church. It was going to be a youth pastor role with 200 kids in the youth group, and it was like, yes, this is going to be awesome. And then, they gave me an offer letter, and then, the summer went through, and they called me and said, hey, we're going to do a building reno instead of paying you to be our youth pastor, but you can still come and do it if you want to. And I was like, no. So I don't, what happened? So I came back to the table and was like, I'm not sure about this, God, but all right. And it's funny now because I go home on Sundays, and I'm like, I can't imagine being anywhere else. I mean, this last year of being here at the table has been so great, and God has grown me so much. So yeah, initially it was disappointing of like, I'm not going to get this awesome job, but really I'm having an awesome job here as well, and God's still providing and teaching me a lot of lessons.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're glad your detour led you here,
I'm
Brandon.
glad I'm here, yes.
We're glad your detour led you here. I think of back when I was 18, I was raised in a family with a lot of trauma. You name it, addiction, suicide, prison, all of that in my family. And when I was 18, God spoke to me very clearly. He said, I want you to move to go to college and prepare for ministry in Minneapolis. And at the time, I didn't know I would never go back. So I left, and there was just a lot of disappointment and pain there. But it was Minneapolis that I met my amazing husband, had our 2 kids. And I look back now, and I think, wow, God. Like, I never expected, we ended up going to New York, coming out here. I never expected what the detours, like you said, that you're going to take us on. But it's better than I could have imagined.
Yes, it's always easier to look at them in retrospect and
Oh,
be
it's
like,
true.
oh, that detour took me such a better way.
Yeah.
But in the midst of it, the disappointment can be really hard.
Yeah.
And we can kind of feel a lot of emotions when we're initially faced with that disappointment. I'm moving away from home. I'm taking a different job I didn't expect, right? We can feel a lot of things.
Right.
It can build up bitterness in us. We can feel angry. We can even kind of start to build resentment in our hearts.
Right.
But what if instead of all of those feelings and sitting in them, we ask this honest question? What if God has a different route for me? What if God has a different plan for my life that could turn out even better than I could ever plan it?
So good.
So here's some things that God has taught me in the midst of my disappointments and redirections that he's done with my life. I've learned that God can turn disappointments and detours into blessings.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like God takes us a different route because he has a bigger blessing for us, a different path for us that's going to be even more fruitful. Like, I can't imagine, Beth, if you stayed in Ohio, I'm sure you do great things, but you've been planting churches all around the country because you said yes to God's detours in your life.
Yeah.
And I mean, Mary, going back to the Christmas story, I mean, can you imagine if she was like, yeah, no, God, I'm not carrying this baby. Like, this baby, this detour, he brought salvation to the entire world for ages and ages, forever to come. This incredible, like, crazy detour turned into the biggest gift and blessing to humanity that we could imagine.
That's so good.
Yes, and something else I learned from detours is that God teaches us to trust him through the detours. Another
right.
blessing that we can find
Yeah.
in detours, even if the detour isn't a blessing itself, is that
That's right.
we can build deeper intimacy with God through
That's
these
right.
detours.
Yeah.
As we learn to trust him in disappointment, and we just go through all the emotions, whatever is anger, confusion, we can choose to lean into God, and that can bring us closer to God, closer in our relationship with him and intimacy with him than happy times
right.
ever could.
That's right.
And I feel like sometimes in the Christian life, we're like, this is about my life being perfect. Like nothing's ever gonna go wrong because I can pray about it, you know?
Yeah.
But that's not what the real Christian life is.
Yeah.
Instead of just having a perfect life where nothing goes
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
Life with Christ is about being in proximity and relationship with him so that we can have comfort, love, and hope when
So
things
good.
do go wrong.
So
Because things are
good.
gonna go wrong.
That's right.
So speaking of things going wrong, what else happens in the Christmas story, Brandon?
Yeah, it's really true that when disappointment comes our way, God takes us on a different route, not a route necessarily we anticipated on traveling on, right? When things don't happen exactly where or when or how we kind of envision them, I think it's really easy to think, did I miss something here?
Right.
Did I mishear you, God? Anyone ever miss a flight or, miss a bus to school? I was always missing the bus growing up. I remember one time I missed this opportunity that it still haunts me. I don't even know how I missed it. I kind of do know, but it's crazy. I really wanted to speak at my graduation. I don't know. I know people are like afraid of public speaking. I enjoy it. So I was like, I want to get up there and I want to share at my graduation in high school. So I wrote this speech and I like proofread it a million times. I took it to a teacher to proofread, which I never do. And I submitted my speech and I got accepted to be one of our speakers at graduation. I got this email and it was this long email about, congratulations, you got, accepted. You have to come to a mandatory meeting, though, and it's going to be on, May 4th at 3 p.m. in this
Don't
office.
tell me you missed the meeting.
I missed the meeting, right? So
Man.
May 4th comes, and I'm like, what is the room I'm supposed to meet in? And I look at the email, and it wasn't a day of the week on it. It was like 5-4, and it was 5-3 at 4 p.m. So I got the number switched.
Oh, no.
So I emailed this teacher back. I'm like, please, this has been a dream of mine. And she's like, no, sorry, we've already picked the speakers. You've missed the opportunity. And it's
That's cold. That's
I know.
cold.
It's like, all right, sheesh. But so I missed the opportunity there. And it's like, I missed something. I didn't get the right.
Yeah.
It was on me. Sometimes that happens in disappointment.
Yeah.
Sometimes we miss things because we mess up.
Right.
But sometimes it's out of our control. Sometimes
That's right.
there's traffic or whatever, and we miss something. We see this unfold in the life of Jesus. Can you just imagine being Mary for an angel came to her and was like, hey, you're going to have a baby even though you're not married, and he's going to be the Son of God, and you're going to call him Jesus. That's kind of exciting. All right, I'm going to give birth to the Son of God, right? This is going to be, they're going to put me up in the Ritz-Carlton. There's going to be someone feeding me grapes or something while I'm...
There's got to be some perks.
Yeah. Meanwhile,
For
now
real.
she's on a donkey and it's cold and it's they're trying to find a place to stay, right? Her birthing plan did not go to according to plan whatsoever,
Not at
right?
all.
It's so chaotic. They're trying to find somewhere to stay. They end up staying with animals in a guest room, which is just bizarre. Definitely not very clean.
Yeah.
But I want you to look at this. Yet, even though all of these crazy things happen, yet Jesus arrived on God's schedule. He still arrived just how God had plans, right? Before social media, back when I was born, my parents, sent out birth announcements.
Yeah.
Now everything's just on social media, which I think kind of downplays things, but they used to send out cards like,
I
hey,
did that for
we
both
got
my kids.
engaged,
There was
or
a card, and you
we
sent
had a
it.
baby, and so
Yeah,
you
I've
get
never
a card
seen
in the
one of
mail.
those.
Now it's
You've
just
never seen one?
No.
you scroll past it. Oh, I guess they had a baby. That's cool, right? But you used to send out announcements, right? This is crazy. There's no birth announcement in Mary's eyes. But even though still craziness happens, right? Even in the midst of the chaos that Jesus was birthed in, God still had a heavenly birth announcement planned. I want you to turn to Luke chapter 2, verses 10 through 14, if you've got your Bibles with you or your Bible reading devices. It says this. The angel of the Lord says, do not be afraid, he said. I bring you good news that will bring great joy to all people. Yes, the Savior, the Messiah, the Lord has been born today in Bethlehem, the city of David. And you will recognize him by this sign. You will find a baby wrapped snugly in strips of cloth, lying in a manger. And suddenly the angel was joined by a vast host of others, the armies of heaven, praising God, saying, glory to God in the highest heaven, and peace on earth to those whom God is pleased. what just happened? Can you imagine, right, the sky being just filled with, it's like a Michelangelo painting like in the Vatican, just the sky is filled with a vast host of angels.
Yeah.
That's better than any, dinky card that, hey, we had a baby, right? That's a birth announcement, right? That's a better birth announcement than Mary and Joseph ever could have come up. Maybe Mary and Joseph hadn't missed anything, right? In the midst of the chaos, this celestial celebration revealed that disappointments lead to God appointments.
Yeah, that's
right?
right.
A lot of times when
That's
we have
right.
disappointments,
That's right.
I want you to hear this morning. When you're disappointed, maybe God is appointing something in your life. Maybe there's a different route. Maybe there's something different that God has in store that's better than something that you could ever do on your own. So I want to ask you two this question. What is maybe a way that God has turned around a disappointment in your life in an unexpected way and maybe appointed something else?
So when I was 18 years old, I was living in Missouri, and I decided to fly over to Washington for this scholarship competition for a full ride scholarship at Northwest University. And I was doing the competition. We're doing group interviews, group exercises, essays, all of it. I felt like I was doing pretty good. Like, I always got good grades. I was like good at talking or whatever. So I was like, I felt really good about it. I was like, I feel like I could get this. So then I go home back to Missouri. I'm finishing high school or whatever. And I get an email and it says, unfortunately, you have not received this full ride scholarship. And I was like, man, that hurt. Like, I really felt confident in it. I was like, man, this was kind of my plan. This is what I thought I was going to do. But God made a way to come to this college anyway. But I didn't have the full ride scholarship. But because I wasn't in the scholarship program, I took a class that I wouldn't have normally taken where I met my husband, Joseph.
Hey.
Yes. And because I didn't have to go through the 4-year program that goes with the scholarship, I got to graduate a year early that helps me plant this church.
Amen.
So I got to be on this church planning team instead of doing an extra year of college. And God works it out. Something that was so crushing and disappointing in the beginning that even touched on my identity. I was like, man, I'm not good enough. But God made a way that brought blessing out of it better than I could even imagine.
Yeah, that's so good. I think one of the biggest disappointments in my life to date was we had bought this house at the top of the housing bubble in the early 2000s, and then we had to move. And so in 2007, when it all crashed, we were $100,000 upside down on this house. And ended up having to do this short sale. And I'm like, God, what in the world? We're losing our house? Like, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, I have always tithed and I have always been faithful, right? You ever do, something happens and you're like, wait a minute, God, what about me? Like, I've been doing stuff right. Like, I don't deserve this, right? And I just remember God whispering, literally through tears. And God said, just wait for it. You ever hear God just say, just wait for it? I didn't know that it would be in 2021, 14 years later, that God would speak to me. I was in, we were all during the pandemic still, and God spoke to me one morning in prayer, says, get your stuff together, get your finances together, you're going to buy a house. And God didn't lead us to just any house. We got a brand new house.
It was crazy.
We got to go in and write on the the framing and put scriptures and pray over it and watch it be built. It was like a miracle, a total miracle. But you're right. Disappointment led to another God appointment, but sometimes we got to wait for it.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I love those stories. And I think that some of those appointments that God makes are some of the biggest, milestones or sort of key frames in our testimony. We can point back to the things that God did in our life. I have some friends that are, far from the Lord, and they have this, idea. I've heard this before. Maybe you've heard this as well, that, maybe God was real, or maybe God was active when he created the universe, but, he's since left or died, or God is dead. He hates, his creation. He's turned away from us. No. What disappointment really reveals is that even though things are chaotic, right, God shows up. We serve an active God who is active in our lives, right? And things, when they don't go to our plan, God is showing up. And I'm so grateful that we don't just serve a God that created the earth and then just left and is now playing golf and is retired somewhere, but he's actually active in the middle of our chaos, in the middle of the things that when we think are going crazy, he's moving, he's active, right? God isn't dead, but he's came. That's what Christmas shows us. It changes everything because Jesus came and he's active in our life and in our world.
That's so good.
Yeah, so Pastor Beth, bring us home here. Talk
Yeah.
is about a little bit more about disappointment.
Well, the reality is nobody likes to feel disappointment. We try to avoid it at all costs,
That's
even
true.
if that means lowering your expectations. I've got 2 kids, and they're single, like you, wanting to mingle. And I'm always telling them, don't lower your expectations. Lifetime is a long time, right? And so keep those expectations high. Yeah. And, here's the thing. Instead of running from disappointment, what if we leaned into it, right? What if we leaned into it? Because here's the thing. Disappointment is actually a teacher. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, what is my disappointment going to teach me? I feel terrible when I'm disappointed. But listen to this. Disappointment actually does this. It reveals who we are relying on. It reveals who we're relying on. Because when we're disappointed, why are we so disappointed? Where were we really trusting, right? When Jesus was still young, something happened that must have really stunned his parents. The tradition in the Jewish culture was to bring newborn babies to dedicate them to God. We've done baby dedications here, right? Well, they would take them to the temple and dedicate them. And something happened. There was a man named Simeon. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but Simeon had a promise that he would see the Messiah before he died. But here's the thing. He was an old man. You ever meet those people, like 1 foot in heaven? Like, every time I talk to my grandma, I'm just like, I love you, grandma, because I'm like, this might be the last time I talk to my grandma, right? When you get up to 100, every phone call, every conversation matters. And so Simeon was getting old, but it says one day that the Spirit led him. The Spirit led him to the temple. And it says that day the Spirit led him to the temple so that when Mary and Joseph came to present the baby Jesus to the Lord as the law required, Simeon was there. He took the child in his arms and praised God, saying, Sovereign Lord, now let your servant die in peace. As you promised, I have seen your salvation, which you have prepared for all people. I love this part. He is a light to reveal God to the nations. Wow. Jesus said, you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I am the light of the world and the glory of your people Israel. Jesus' parents were amazed at what was being said about him, right? Yeah. This was no ordinary dedication. This was no ordinary message. He's the light to reveal. After all that Joseph and Mary had been through, the scandal, the traumatic birth situation, the running from the sadistic king, right? Disappointment teaches us who we can really trust. Yeah. It teaches us who we can trust. Sometimes when I'm disappointed, I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have been trusting in them anyway. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. Right? They learned that they couldn't trust in people or programs or governments, right? Yeah. They needed to trust in God and God alone. Trusting God takes time, doesn't it? Let's just be honest. It takes some time to learn to trust God. We need to get to know him. Guess what? I did not trust my husband on the first date. Not even the second or the third. In fact, the first time he said he loved me, I was like, you don't even know me yet. He's like, no, I've been watching you. I'm in love with you. This is going to happen. And I was like, me coming in with trust issues, I was like, who is this strange man from Nebraska telling me he loves me? Right? So sometimes trust takes time. Now, today, we're coming up on 27 years, babe, at the end of the month. Wow. At the end of this month, we'll celebrate 26. I can tell you today, I trust that man with my life. Yeah. But it took time. Wow. Here's the question. When we're disappointed, it reveals who we're relying on. Yeah. Do I really trust God with my deepest disappointments? I remember having a conversation with a pastor once, friend, a colleague, through a difficult time. And at the end of the conversation, how many love those friends that just ask you good questions, that make you even think, right? Think what you're thinking about and figure it all out. At the end of the conversation, I realized what the issue was. I didn't trust God. I even said it out loud. I said, you know what? I think you're right. I don't think I'm trusting God in this situation. So how has disappointment been a teacher in your life, and what has it revealed?
Yeah, when I think about disappointment, I think of this, metaphor of a crucible. Yes. And I don't know if you know what a crucible is or not, but when, blacksmiths or metal workers are smithing silver or gold, they'll put it in this pot and they'll heat it up to just unearthly temperatures, and they'll wait till it cools off a little bit, and then they'll scrape off the top layer of the impurities, and then once it cools down, they'll put it back into the fire and do it again, right? Over and over again. And as I was doing my research about, crucibles this week, I loved the way that the silversmith was able to tell when the silver was ready for production. He was able to tell when it's ready when he can see his reflection in the silver. And I think that's a lot similar to how God uses crucibles in our life, right? That sometimes in disappointment and chaotic situations, it can feel like the heat has been turned up and we're like chickens with our heads cut off, running around just like, what is going on? God, where are you? This is really uncomfortable. But what God is doing is he's teaching us a lesson, and he's scraping off those impurities in our life and saying, hey, I'm making you more into my image, right? These are some things that I need to scrape out in your life so you can look more like me. So it's over and over again, but like you said, it takes some time. But in that process, we become more and more like Jesus.
That's so good. That'll preach, Brandon.
Yeah.
You should be a preacher.
I was thinking about it.
That's good. I love that lesson. I think something that disappointment has taught me is what is really stable, what is really eternal, and what is really lasting.
Yeah.
And it's God.
Good.
Like through disappointments and trials, I've learned like people who I thought were going to be my friends for the rest of my life weren't. They left my life, right?
Yep.
Ways I thought my career was going to go and I thought my life was going to play out. It changes. And it just makes me remember, man, there are things that are temporary in life and there are things that are eternal. And my reliance upon God, just God being there for me, is something that's eternal and that will stay and that will last. And it's a good reminder of, man, where am I putting my trust?
That's so good. I love the words of Jesus. We know they're the words of Jesus because they're in red, right? Jesus says in John 14:1, he says, don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. You know what I love about that? That's a short list. I put my trust in a lot of different things, right? I put my trust in my car every time I get in there that my brakes are going to work, right? I put my trust that when I snap that check that it's actually going to go into my account and I'm going to be able to get that money later. But Jesus says this, no, I want you to make a short list of who you really trust. Trust in God. Trust also in me. Disappointment asks us this question. Who are you going to trust? Are you going to trust God? You're going to trust yourself. I want the worship team to come this morning, and I'm just so grateful for this conversation this morning, especially, disappointment leading to detours. I love that concept, that it might not happen how we want it to happen. That first Christmas didn't unfold how they thought it was going to unfold, and that's okay because God still had an appointment, right? And our disappointment leads to God appointments. That just because I feel like I miss it, God still has a plan. Can I tell you, 2,000 years later, we're still talking about that God appointment? And you're here in church listening to this message by a God appointment. It's no accident that you're here today, hearing this timeless message. And disappointment, it reveals my reliance. Who am I relying on? Who am I really going to trust when I feel the deepest disappointments? It's okay. Can we just free ourselves this morning and say it's okay to be disappointed with people, with programs, with governments, even the church? Guess what? You're going to be disappointed by the people of God sometimes, right?
That's true.
But I will tell you this morning, God will never disappoint you. If you put your trust in Jesus, he will never disappoint you. Why? Because he always fulfills his promises. You'll never get a call from an angel saying, hey, sorry, there was a warehouse fire. We can't get your, Jesus isn't going to make it on time. Your prayers aren't going to be answered. No, none of that. He says, no, he's an on-time God. He's an on-time God. Thank you, table team. Appreciate you guys. Give them a hand this morning. A few years ago, I took a trip to Atlanta, and my daughter and I went for a church conference and ended up going and visiting the birthplace of Martin Luther King Jr. And they had a little gift shop in the house next to the home where he was raised, and there was a little plaque with one of his quotes that I bought, and I actually put it in the bathroom in the morning. So when I'm brushing my teeth every morning, I see this message, and I want to share it with you this morning because there's such words of wisdom. He says this: we must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. I'm going to say it again. We must accept finite disappointment. We're going to have disappointments in this life, but never lose infinite hope. Of all people, King was familiar with disappointment, wasn't he? But he was also a man of great faith. He knew that his God would never disappoint him. Through all the pain and all the struggle and even his ultimate death, he knew that there was a home in heaven for him, that there was an infinite hope beyond what you could see on this earth. We all have disappointments that are going to get tangled, especially around the holidays. But Jesus came to give us ultimate hope. Ultimate hope. Hope in God, hope in his plan, hope in eternity. Aren't you grateful that this world and this life is not all there is? This earth is not our home. There was an old-time gospel song, this world is not my home. We're just passing through, right?